You read Genesis 1, and suddenly you find that everything the Democratic Party is trying to do violates one of the fundamental tenets of God's created order, and that's exactly where they're striking right now. And I, for one, don't think that's a coincidence. That's what happens when you have a movement that is aligned with evil.
And welcome back to The Narrative, everyone. Aaron Bear flying solo today. Mike Andrews is running lazy today on PTO this week, and David Mahan is running around crazy over at the State House trying to stop them from exploiting poor people with expanded gambling. But we have some good news out of Washington, D.C., and we wanted to hop on. We actually were planning on playing Sage Steele's remarks for this week's podcast from our Cincinnati Gala 2 weeks ago. But really shocking news broke late last night that the House got the reconciliation bill passed. And you know, in all of my years working in public policy, I've never actually seen a bill get out of the House with this much great stuff in it. And really shocking what got it included. I think one of the messages I got late last night was in a crazy turn of events, the bill actually got stronger towards the end, as opposed to most of the time the way these things go is we get a bunch of stuff in early and then all the good stuff gets stripped out. So when I saw the news hit, I said, okay, we got to get the one guy in who we know has his finger on the pulse of what's going on with this bill. Eric Teetsel, good friend, the president of Center for Renewing America. Eric, good to see you, brother.
What's up, buddy? Is that a donut?
It is indeed a donut here. Listen, man, no judgment in
is it a cream filled? Chocolate cream filled?
It is. Buckeye Donuts here. We have really the finest cuisine around here. So thanks for
looks delicious.
The miracles of podcasting where I get to keep the magic quiet to folks. Thanks for putting that just for everyone to see.
Oh, is this not recorded on video?
The video we don't have our actual podcast studio. That's all being renovated right now. We are still in the in our closet while the podcast studio gets so just audio at this point. So thanks for letting everybody know. Indeed, I have a Buckeye donut with my coffee in front of me right now. So appreciate that. But you look great. You look camera ready and ready to go.
Thanks, buddy. I ironically, the reason I'm wearing a suit today is because I'm going to go over to the White House later for the president's big Make America Healthy Again speech.
Doing my part.
Listen, are those Maha approved?
It is indeed not. And as my wife, who has gone, all in on Casey Means and Good Energy, would tell you, my microbiome are not happy with me right now. My girls literally, they find the Good Energy book around the house and hide it because they hate. Maria finished reading that book and threw out the Eggo waffles. So please give Casey, Surgeon General elect or whatever she is, Casey Means, our best.
I will. I'm glad to know mine is not the only marriage that has like a third or fourth voice in it. For my wife, it's Bill Simmons.
Yeah. Oh.
And for me, it is Tara Lee Cobble.
Yep.
For Abby.
Well, honestly, Eric, I am on a because we are both, and I promise we're going to talk about the reconciliation bill, but we are both Bill Simmons fans. But I have gone on a Bill Simmons hiatus because we had Sage Steele at our gala, and I said, so tell me about Bill Simmons, and apparently not a great dude.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, which shocked me because he's never. There's the ESPN broadcasters that like wear their woke stuff on their sleeves.
Yeah.
And then there's guys like Simmons who, obviously he's liberal, but at least seem to be, not the complete leftist bigot that we're used to on ESPN. So
yeah. Well, he also got persecuted by ESPN,
right?
Not for political reasons, but
yeah,
you'd think he'd kind of empathize with.
Totally. Exactly. With someone like Sage who got the same brass that forced him out for going after. So I'm officially on a Bill Simmons break just through the NBA playoffs. I'm not going to be able to make it through the NFL season.
Well, what? Hey, we've got Russillo.
That's right.
We know
We
he's mad.
we
We
still
know.
got Rosello, and he voted for Trump.
I
That's
know.
there's no way that guy didn't. Anyway, we digressed quite a bit there. Let's get back on track.
Sorry, it's on me.
One big beautiful bill that just got passed. I guess before we dive into all that was in there, I was out in Washington earlier this week, and the folks was talking to out there said, "Hey, that if we can get this done by this weekend, it's going to be a miracle." The members all seem to be bearing down for one of these super late night, marathon times and a long week, few weeks ahead, and then all of a sudden everything just broke last night. So we're recording this on Thursday. This will
Yep.
go up on Friday. What happened from your perspective, and how did the president and honestly Speaker Johnson pull this off?
Great question. Honestly, I woke up this morning and I got out of the shower and looked at my phone and saw that like 5 minutes ago the House had passed this bill. And I was like, "Wait, what?" The House is not typically voting at 7 o'clock in the morning. But in Washington, there's no power quite as strong as jet fumes and the desire to leave town by Thursday, especially heading into a holiday weekend. So the seriousness of that, I think, can't be under considered. Just people wanting to leave Washington. Those kinds of deadlines create really, really good leverage
Amen.
over
That is
members.
a strong pull.
It definitely is. The even stronger pull, which won't surprise anybody because it's the most potent gravitational force in politics today, is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And he got back from the Middle East after his big long trip, which happened to overlap with most of these negotiations here heading into the finish line, and kind of plugged in. And over the last few days, his involvement personally, meeting and calling and talking to members of Congress, coming to the Hill, having meetings, is what brought this thing over the finish line. He made very clear what he wanted to see happen, what he found acceptable, and what he thought was not. And I think he gave some assurances to some people in different ways. Who can say entirely what happened behind closed doors with individual members? But that is the big difference when it came to actually getting this bill across the finish line. They're still working through this text. It's a long bill. But there have been some hints that there were some minor changes made in the right direction, especially for some of the conservative holdouts on things like when the work requirements in Medicaid take effect. So that certainly helped too.
Yeah, no, I want to dive into some of those Medicaid work requirements and things like that. I think the big headline out of this, for a lot of us who have been involved in the reconciliation process and the budget process for going on 10, 15 years, is we actually defunded Planned Parenthood. And there's a lot of, again, I think the tax cuts are huge, the Medicaid work requirement. There's a lot of things that are big wins in this, but the defunding Planned Parenthood for me represented, again, just something different about the Trump administration and this Congress than ever before. So, can you talk a little bit about what all went into actually getting that done this time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you do have a Republican Party that is still pro-life, despite what people may think or believe. Obviously, it's not as clear cut as pure abolition all the way across the board. But when it comes to a question like, should taxpayers subsidize the cost of elective abortion, that's a winning issue in the minds of most Republicans. It falls in the same category as things like the Mexico City policy, which would prohibit, taxpayer funding of abortion overseas through AIDS programs. So that's what made a move like this more politically feasible. I think it also helped that you have Mike Johnson, who is a true believer and genuinely pro-life, and was willing to exert some meaningful leadership on that specific question. It probably also helps that you had some areas where Congress had failed to deliver on life and sensed that they needed to deliver in order to prove to this important part of the conservative movement that they were listening.
No, honestly, there's a piece of the the defunding Planned Parenthood to me that reminds me a little bit of the embassy move in the first Trump term to Jerusalem, where it's something that Republicans talked about all the time and would campaign on, um, and just for us in the States, and I'm sure you remember this when you were in Kansas. The national pro-life groups would come to you and say, "We got to do defund Planned Parenthood," and then the budget vote would come around and they wouldn't score it or they wouldn't
That's
push
right.
it, or
That's
they
right.
and it for me, I just felt burnt by it. Of like, okay, so
Yeah.
we're not ever really serious about doing this, but this time it's gotten done, and I think to your point, Eric, I think that can't be underestimated. One, obviously, the force of Trump, the the political force of Trump to just get things done, right? Which I think is his. If I as I try to describe what is Trump's motivating force, it's just getting things done. That like the ideological issues aren't as core, especially on life and things like that. But the just we're going to deliver on things we said to do is very much him. And then I know for a lot of folks, they were. I even had questions about Speaker Johnson coming in as Speaker. Is he going to be able to deliver on things? But the one thing nobody ever questioned was he's strongly pro-life,
Mhm.
and to have this is where it shows having a speaker that is genuinely with us and not kind of patting pro-lifers on the head makes a difference.
I will say, however, that that there's a lot of truth to everything that you just said. The other major difference here is that this is reconciliation.
Yeah.
And for people who don't know, it's a special process. It's highly technical. It's not like regular appropriations, because it can pass with a pure majority in the Senate. Just 50 votes if you have the vice president. And so when we talk about the failure to take proactive measures like defunding Planned Parenthood in previous appropriations and budget fights, those all occur in a world where you have to get 60 votes in the Senate. And so the criticism is that the party failed to fight and use whatever political capital was necessary in order to get it over that higher hurdle. They didn't have that high hurdle here, and so they could and did do it, and they get credit for that. But it doesn't change the fact that these are the same people who didn't want to exert the kind of fight that was necessary to do it when it was a higher threshold.
Yeah, yeah.
There's work to do.
I'm gonna get you like a shirt from 300 that says "This is reconciliation." Like this is Sparta, just for next time going in. All right, let's talk about some other things. Taxes. So obviously the big the continuation of the Trump tax cuts. Again, this was one of these things that I feel for a lot of folks, they might not have recognized the fiscal cliff we would have been at. Like a lot of folks, the pain they would have felt if those tax cuts hadn't been continued. Can you talk a little bit about what that actually is going to mean, having the Trump tax cuts continued?
Yeah, it's going to mean that you're not seeing an increase in your taxes. This is a wide-ranging package that includes tax reform on both the corporate and individual side. Mostly reforms on the corporate side, very technical things having to do with like deducting capital losses and R&D and that sort of stuff, which matters a lot for economic growth. But some really good stuff on the personal side too. For example, there's an expansion in the child tax credit that would have expired had it not been for this bill, and gone down to $1,000 a kid, I believe. Under this bill, it'll remain at 2,500. So that's real money in the pockets of people who have kids and are trying to get by.
Yeah, and that's we haven't talked a lot about this, but there was that big New York Times story about sort of the pronatalism movement in the Trump administration, which is just a terrible name. Why can't it just be like the have babies movement, get married and have babies movement? It's a better name than the natalism, whatever that means exactly.
Yeah.
But it is, this is where I think you see JD Vance's hands on things like this. He's been really strong on this issue. And I think the other thing on the tax side was, and this was something on Tuesday we were advocating for in Washington, was the first ever national school choice program that we have in this federal tax credit. can you tell folks a little bit about what that looks like and what that will actually mean? If again, we still got to wait, we got to get through the Senate, but we feel pretty good about our odds of getting these things through the Senate.
Yeah, this is just another example of all of the great stuff that is sort of tucked into this very far-reaching, um, I think it's 500-page bill. Unlike most major appropriations legislation that you've seen in the last couple of generations, this one is full of stuff that conservatives can like. And you kind of read through it and go, "Oh, I didn't even know this was in here," and that's great.
Yeah.
Another example of this are what were called, I think, MAGA accounts, and they're now being called Trump accounts. And it's $1,000 that the federal government will put into a brokerage account for every baby that is born, and it's under their name. And parents and grandparents can then contribute to those accounts, and they'll grow with the market over the life of the kid, so that when you're an adult, you've got a good head start having invested in the market over all those years. That's actually a Ted Cruz bill. It's just great stuff like that. That's all through this thing.
And that reminds me. I remember when it was either the very Orwellian named Inflation Reduction Act or one of the dumb Biden named bills. I remember seeing, and I talked about this at an event. There was just one line item. It was like two sentences, but it was $2.5 billion for tree equity, which was and like there's, I would use that as an example. Like, they're literally just because the line was like to encourage, sustainability and environmentalism in communities across the country, so basically they were just that one little line of $2.5 billion. CCV, we've got a $5 million budget. So somebody can do that math on, they're literally just funding hundreds of CCVs all over the country to push leftist propaganda. That's what they would do in their bills. And for once, now again, they're not funding CCVs through this, but they are funding good things with those little line items, like the MAGA funds or whatever.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's worth, since you brought it up, it's worth noting that the bill also makes more than $1.5 trillion in cuts to things like the Orwellian named Inflation Reduction Act and the Green New Deal and all that garbage, trying to rein it all in and put America back on a much more sustainable fiscal path. Doesn't solve every problem.
Yeah.
Certainly, but definitely a big step in the right direction. I don't think there has ever been legislation that made a cut of this size in federal spending, ever.
Let's talk about those cuts real quick, Eric, because there were two areas that sounded like, in at least the reports I read this morning, that really kind of got the last votes over the edge from the conservatives, right? There were two areas that got the last conservatives in, and then one area that got some of the more moderate members in that I want to ask you about. But those two areas were, they expedited the Medicaid work requirements, right? I think it was from 2029 to 2026 to next year is when those work requirements are going to kick in. And they repealed the sort of environmental tax credits from, I think it was from 2031 was when they were going to go away to maybe 2029 or 2027. It was something like that. Can you maybe walk through those two issues, why those are such big wins, especially the Medicaid work requirements, what that's actually going to look like for states and for communities?
Yeah. Work requirements in welfare programs have long been probably the single most significant sort of conservative marker when it comes to entitlement programs. We believe that there is a time and a place for us as a wealthy nation to help people who are struggling, but that they have a role to play in that. And so a fairly modest work requirement is one of the ways that you induce people to continue to seek their own well-being and hopefully be on a glide path to self-sustainability, rather than permanently relying on welfare in order to get by. And so this bill would implement a work requirement. It's really important because Medicaid is quickly becoming the most expensive entitlement program in the country. It is growing at an exponential rate that's largely due to Obamacare, which at the end of the day, if you had to define what it is that President Obama did, it's that he expanded Medicaid to put, namely, able-bodied men into the program who otherwise would not have been eligible. And not only did he put them into the program, but people have probably heard about the so-called federal match for Medicaid recipients. The federal government covers a share of the cost of people who are on Medicaid. States are responsible for the other part. For the expansion population under the ACA, the match is 90%. But that applies to able-bodied men without dependents, which is exactly the population you would think is least in need of Medicaid. That's the population you want working. By comparison, the match for, say, a woman with kids, a single woman, a single mom, is in the 50 to 60% range. So you're getting a much higher federal incentive to put people on Medicaid for the people who should least be on Medicaid. It's wild, but it's very politically difficult to roll something like that back. We should. Even just bringing those rates into alignment with one another would save a lot of money and be good public policy. It's a heavy lift because at the end of the day, what will your political opponents and the corporate media, but I repeat myself, say? They'll say you're kicking people off of welfare. You're hurting poor people, right? And they've already started to say that. The president tweeted that today. President Obama, that is. So it's hard to explain complex public policy. Once you do, I think it makes a lot of rational sense. This work requirement would give people some skin in the game. In terms of the timeline, people are probably asking, well, why can't it just start as soon as the bill's signed into law? And that's a very reasonable question. The answer is that it does take some time to implement complex policies like that. You have to have a system in place for states where they can verify that someone is working and is therefore eligible for this program. I can only imagine the sort of like software stuff that they're trying to do. So initially they asked for like 4 years to figure that out, maybe even 5. And members of Congress said, look, no, Elon could do this in 90 days. You get a year and a half and we'll figure it out from there. So moving in the right direction. What was the other one you asked me about?
It was work and the environmental tax credits that they rolled back.
Right. Yeah. So this is the Green New Deal stuff, subsidizing wind and solar and all this other stuff. They rolled those back. This is another area where you kind of have principle butting up against pragmatism. And there are people who would say, well, look, we may not agree with these tax credits, but there are lots of people who have built business models and plans, assuming that the thing the government told them they were going to give them would be there. And so how do you responsibly and sort of empathetically off-ramp that when people are relying on it? My view is like, sorry, you shouldn't have done it. But it is fair, I think, for people to have constituents who are asking those questions and to try to find them a glide path. There's also money in there for things like nuclear development, which I think is good public policy, much better than some of the other stuff like tree equity, for example. And so it's not an entire rollback of the entire law because of some of those pragmatic questions and policy ones, but it does take a big fat bite out of it. I think it's about $500 billion. It might even be more.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, the Medicaid stuff alone, you take Ohio's budget. We're going through our state budget right now. It's a 2-year. We do a 2-year budget every year. It's about $60 billion we spend, and then we get an additional $30 billion almost from the feds just for Medicaid. I mean, it's massive amount of. And then actually, Representative Mike Davila from Northeast Ohio. He's the vice chairman of the House Finance Committee. Just came out with a report that showed there was $6 billion in likely Medicaid fraud in Ohio. Again, think about that. That's a tenth of our budget of what the state spends on our budget in fraud.
The state of California, I believe 40% of Californians are now on Medicaid, and that the federal money that goes to California as part of their match for Medicaid is larger than almost every other state budget.
Gosh. See, and it, like, for me with this whole Medicaid work requirement thing too, because and Eric, I don't think you and I've talked about this much, but we're going on this big push in CCV and with other states on marriage and family. And how do we encourage more marriage, right? We did the family structure index that shows the massive decline of marriage in the states and the crashing fertility rate and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that we're seeing more and more is low income folks aren't getting married. And there's a lot of different factors that play into that. But more and more, it's the welfare state. And so how do we look at all of our entitlements? I mean, we ran some quick numbers here in Ohio, and the marriage penalty on things like Medicaid, SNAP, housing subsidies, childcare subsidies. I mean, you're talking thousands of dollars a year from families if they get married. And so if we look at the way we've actually structured so many of our entitlements, they disincentivize the two things that are proven to make people self-sustaining: work and marriage. We're literally they're geared towards sustaining people on the program, not towards helping people make healthy decisions and
Right.
good outcomes to get them off the government, off the government dole. And this is one more path. How do we rethink all of these entitlements around the concepts of work and marriage? Seems to be the course, at least from our perspective, that we need to be going.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, let's talk border stuff. This was obviously, aside from President Biden's dementia, maybe the biggest issue that delivered the election for President Trump was the border. What all did we get in here? Again, it's a budget bill, so there's not as in Ohio, our budget bill is like probably there's a significant portion of the budget that's actually policy, right? This all has to be very much tied to finances, so you don't get a ton of sort of policy wins in here. But what did we get in this bill on immigration?
Two major categories here. One is in what's the Homeland Security title, and that's the border security piece, right? So that's money for agents, money for ICE, money to build a wall, all of the things you need to make sure that fewer and fewer criminals are coming across our borders and that it's defended. This bill has tens of billions of dollars, much needed money in order to bolster that. The other piece you have is in the judiciary title, and that's the deportation part. So this is where the president and his team, Tom Homan and others, are taking seriously the need to track down and boot out criminals who made their way into the country, especially over the last 4 or 5 years under President Biden. And this bill includes tens of billions of dollars for that. That includes money for very practical things that it might not come to your mind that would need to happen. For example, let's say you're trying to deport 25 guys that you picked up in Boston. They need a van.
Just Irish guys. We're just taking the Irish out
Right.
of
Yeah.
Boston.
See ya. Yeah. No, I mean, they need vans
Yeah.
to put them in. They need space to house them until they can get a plane. They need a plane. They can fly them somewhere. So those are the sort of very pragmatic and costly things that are involved. That's why when people say, it costs like thousands of dollars to deport someone, this is what they're talking about: manpower, transportation, housing, all of that's involved in it. And so those coffers have now been filled. Congress delivered exactly what the administration asked for on both of those fronts. And that's going to allow them to continue to build on the awesome work that they've already been doing, the historic effort that's already been done to secure the border and make America safer again.
So I guess the one thing that when I'm talking immigration with just folks out in the state and the community, the sad reality of where we're always going to be, that I think was really exposed with the last administration on this issue is, as long as there's someone like a President Trump in the White House, all of this expenditure is great. But the minute somebody who's in there that doesn't feel like enforcing the law, that was the biggest frustration when, Senator Langford and all these people were pushing the border bill with Biden. That
Yes,
like at the end of the day, it comes down to, is somebody going to enforce the law,
that's
right?
right.
And the fact that this is great, we have all these resources here, and it's going to help make everything be safer in the long run. But the fact that Trump comes in and it basically like that the spigot gets turned off.
Correct.
Is that, I mean, from your perspective, is that the way it's just we're always going to live in it if we don't have somebody in the White House is going to enforce it? It's, I don't want to say it doesn't matter how much resources we send. It's just you're going to see those floodgates to open back up.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to that question. One is, will Congress follow up on this bill with legislation to tighten some of the loopholes that future presidents in the mold of Joe Biden might exploit in the name of ruining the country? And hopefully they will. That those laws exist. People know what it is you would try to do. Now, to your point, if somebody wants to defy the law, they'll just do it. And one of the real frustrations that a lot of us are experiencing now is the way that the courts handle these situations. It's hard to have standing to sue a president who is not enforcing a law like immigration. Um, you can try. They haven't had a lot of luck, and even if you do, it takes weeks and months and years to get those things resolved. All the while, the people are coming in. But then on the back end, it's really easy to have standing when you're getting deported.
Yeah.
And you have judges who are willing, district court judges who are willing to issue nationwide injunctions that just throw everything to a halt and force administrations like the current one to be in the position of defying the courts or whatever, simply by trying to keep America safe. And so we've got to figure that problem out, and get back to a place of sanity when it comes to how we grapple with these things. Because currently, the way the game is structured is sort of they win, we lose in all scenarios.
Yeah. I want to ask, just because you also host a podcast called The Bully Pulpit. Have you guys had the sort of Christian theological throwdown over immigration policy on there? Because it's something it's funny on this podcast, whenever we've had Laura Reese on from Heritage and a few other folks talking about immigration before, and it's probably the area that I'll get the most feedback. The funny thing is, a lot of times it's from people who I know are working for Soros-funded organizations. But have you guys had any of the that conversation on Bully Pulpit?
So you're friends with folks at the ERLC? Is that
One or two, and then a few other folks here in town that are connected with similar organizations. So
that's a joke, kind of.
kind of, it is and it isn't. Yeah.
Thanks for the
We've also had
opportunity.
Basham on the program, so anyway.
Yeah, right down the middle.
Yeah.
I love it. Thanks for the opportunity to plug my podcast. Yes, the Bully Pulpit. No, we have talked about immigration. I'm pleased to say that we don't aim for sort of centrist respect all perspectives on our podcast. Our sense was that there were enough of those, and what we try to do is be people who are faithful first, unapologetically Christian, and committed to a biblical worldview. And then unapologetic about the fact that our faith in Jesus and Christian worldview in this time leads us to some pretty darn conservative stances when it comes to contemporary issues of public policy. They just do. You start from the Bible, you follow where it goes, and it lands you in a conservative place most of the time. Not every time, but most of the time, especially on the most pressing issues of our time. You read Genesis 1, and suddenly you find that everything the Democratic Party is trying to do violates one of the fundamental tenets of God's created order, whether it's marriage or human sexual identity or even the good of work, as we were talking about before. All of that is embedded in the very earliest story of our creation, and that's exactly where they're striking right now. And I, for one, don't think that's a coincidence. That's what happens when you have a movement that is aligned with evil, which is the current state of play. So when it comes to immigration, we do talk about this. We do acknowledge that this is not one of those issues where the Bible offers clear guidance on what public policy in the 21st century should be for America. It's not a Genesis 1 creation order issue at that level. It falls into the category of, I think, prudence and wisdom and determining how you try to apply clear ethical and moral principles to a particular public policy problem of our time. I certainly don't think that welcoming the stranger or the fact that Jesus was supposedly a refugee means that we throw open our borders to anyone and everyone who wants to come. I think that's lazy and stupid.
Yeah.
But it probably does mean that we need to make more serious, more complex considerations about who we are as a nation, what we value, what our priorities are, what's in the interest of our current citizens. And when I look at those questions, what I see is that the current system is totally broken, and we got to get our hands around it and make it better.
Yeah,
One of the if for no other reason, and then I'll stop my rant. And this is something that Tom Homan, the Borders Czar, talks about all the time. He spent 30 years as a border agent. Every time he talks about the border, he gets teary-eyed because he has seen the humanitarian disaster that happens when you have Mexican drug cartels in charge. They're trafficking people. They're gang raping little girls. They're murdering people. People are being dragged out into the desert, and at the first sign of security, abandoned so that they can burn in the sun or die of dehydration. Like, morality demands security for that reason, if no other reason, because it's the people who are being taken advantage of by these evil forces on the other side of the border who are suffering the most.
Amen. No, that's honestly, the key word I think you used there was the sort of the prudential side of the conversation around immigrations, because yeah, you're right. There's not what I think is a very clear-cut argument on things like abortion in God's word, about the sanctity of human life and the immorality of murder, things like that jump out to you here. But the practical realities of an open border, and to me, the refugee policy is the best example of that. I remember getting to this debate even in the first Obama administration when I was in the AG's office. And then into the Trump era, which was, oh, well, we bring in these refugees and we vet them. And exactly how do you vet somebody from Iran or Saudi Arabia or one of the or Colombia, for goodness sake, right? That
Yeah.
It's not like they've got a LinkedIn profile and a long credit history that you can go and search and see what their posts are. Like the hubris of, oh, well, we vet them. So they're safe. That doesn't mean anything, right? You question them a little bit, and they give you key answers. Like there's a common sense side of it, and again, all too often, and I think this is the place where honestly the left and a lot of Democrat policies lead you to is they take biblical commandments of how we're supposed to interact interpersonally, and apply them societally, right? And try to force that mandate on us, to take us to some really, I mean, again, if there's one upshot of the 4 years under Biden is we got to really see what do all these nice sounding policies get us to.
Let me give you another example just to drive this point home, related to the border. There are kids who have been either stolen or rented out to cartels so that they can travel back and forth across the border multiple times, so that when that adult who has a kid who does not belong to them and whom they do not care about reaches either a point of entry or is just engaged by a Border Patrol agent and they claim asylum, they're more sympathetic because they have a kid with them.
Yeah.
It's a pretend child.
Yeah.
For the very purposes of sneaking into the country, and then that poor kid gets sent back. So what is this administration doing that the last administration didn't do? DNA testing.
Yeah. Wow.
To ensure that kid actually belongs to you. Now, there are people who will say, "Oh, they hate. Look, they hate these people. They're keeping them locked in tents." Well, yeah, to stop child trafficking. Like,
right.
You guys got to wake up. Empathy is not enough.
No.
You actually have to pay attention to the details if you care about people as much as you purport to.
Right. Well, and we saw the very similar things in Ohio, in Springfield, right? Like you take a town of 60,000 and you drop 20,000 Haitian refugees on them in a span of 3 to 4 years. Like both what that does to the Haitians there and the issues we saw going on in that community and of with trafficking and things like that. But then also just the people in Springfield, where now all of a sudden you have 20,000 people dropped on your town that aren't from there, don't know the traffic laws, don't know the culture, and everything that happens with them. So yeah, another good rabbit trail there, Teetsel. That one's my fault though. Anyway, last things on any other from your perspective, any other high level wins in this budget bill outside the immigration, obviously tax front. Oh, this was the other question I had for you real quick. Getting the votes at the end, you heard, okay, they needed to expedite the Medicaid work requirements, escalate the scaling back of the environmental tax credits. But then for the moderate Republicans, real quick, they talked about expanding and preserving the SALT tax, the state and local government tax. Can you explain what that is? Again, obviously not something we're thrilled about, but was something that was a compromise to get to the votes we needed to get to. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. I'll do my best. So, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was the tax reform bill from the first Trump administration in 2017, that's due to expire at the end of this year if it's not renewed, put a cap on something called the state and local tax deduction. So the cap was $10,000. So prior to that, people who lived in high tax states where the state income tax was large, places like New York or California, they could deduct the state taxes they paid from their federal tax burden and get a credit for those that was unlimited. The effect of that is that the federal government is subsidizing high tax states.
Right.
New York can just say, well, for our citizens, they won't feel the difference. So why not keep that money here in our state government rather than sending it to Washington? Whereas for low tax states, like places like Florida that have zero state income tax, their citizens have to spend all that money to Washington to go to the IRS. And so this is good public policy, imposing a cap, especially a relatively low cap like $10,000. But it's due to expire, which would mean it would come back to an unlimited deduction. So the question for moderate Republican members from states like California and especially New York was what can we get out of this negotiation to make our wealthiest constituents and donors happy? And they demanded some pretty outrageous policies. And those were whittled down to the point where it's now a $40,000 tax deduction that is capped at a $500,000 annual salary. So if you make less than $500,000 a year, you can deduct up to $40,000 in state and local taxes against your federal income tax. I personally think that is not great policy. It's certainly better than an unlimited deduction. But I think it's probably far too generous and will continue to lead to bad incentives. But this is sometimes what it looks like to make the sausage. And you've got a 3-vote majority in the House. And those guys cared about this a whole heck of a lot. And almost like an inexplicable amount when you consider that had the Tax Cut and Jobs Act expired, it would have resulted in a large tax increase at the federal level for those same people. And I think the math worked out such that the actual benefit would have been a lot worse for them in that scenario. Nevertheless, this is what these guys fought for. So that's where it ended up. We'll see what happens in the Senate on that.
Yeah, so that's a good segue. Where do we go from here? When is this hitting Trump's desk? Likely, all that kind of stuff.
It's got to get through the Senate. The House did their work. Now it heads to the other body. Senators, apparently, we've been told we're working very closely with the House in crafting the bill. That may be true. I will just say my own experience as a former Senate staffer is that those guys and gals tend not to pay that much attention until it's in front of them, and when it is in front of them, they have their very own strongly felt opinions about what the public policy should be. Almost without regard for what the House thinks, as is their prerogative. So they're going to have a process, and it's probably going to take quite some time. I'd be surprised if it's quick. Maybe, hopefully before the August recess, this bill will end up on the president's desk. It's always possible; it could be way before then, but the Senate's got to do their thing. They're going to make changes, which means it's got to go back to the House and pass again.
Do they have to do
Yep. Unless somehow they manage to just pass it the way that it is, and then it could go to the president. I don't think anyone believes that's going to happen. So
yeah. No, that's great. Well, Eric, thanks for everything you do in Washington. I just can't encourage enough guys. Center for Renewing America on all of these issues today is really anymore the first place I go. Just for perspective on these things, because there's obviously a lot of different takes on what's happening. But at CRA, under Eric's leadership, you have both conservatives but Christians there as well that are keeping an eye on these things. Eric, where can they connect with you guys at CRA?
Sure. You can find us at americarenewing.com. You can find me on X at Eric Teetsel, at the Bully Pulpit. And thank you, Aaron. CCV is truly the most important state-based think tank in America. You all are crushing it, and really proud of you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.